One Belt, One Road, and the coming dominance of China. Yes, even over America. That's the topic of today's Bold and Blunt, and I'm your host, Cheryl Chumley, giving you a Christian conservative look at today's news, politics, culture, and events. The Belt and Road Initiative. Have you heard of it? BRI, One Belt, One Road, comes from that old China policy, Silk Road, and so forth. It's a massive so-called infrastructure project, and that's infrastructure defined in its loosest of terms, such as this Joe Biden administration considering infrastructure, jobs, for example. If you haven't heard of it and you haven't heard of the coming gloomy predictions for America because of this One Belt, One Road initiative, this is a podcast that you really need to listen into. Before I get into all that, though, I want to quickly mention if you like Bold and Blunt, you can get Bold and Blunt. Yes, no joke. I am not joking on this. You can get Bold and Blunt right to your email box, if you like, by going to WashingtonTimes.com, go to the newsletter section, find my name, click on it, and sign up, subscribe. It's free. To my 3 times a week newsletter. It comes out Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, and it contains all my commentaries that I write all day long, all week long, every second, every day, even, at the Washington Times. All my commentaries giving you the bullet points and the arguments you need to fight off this far leftist influence that's infiltrating America, such as the One Belt, One Road initiative and its accompanying policies. And included in this 3 times a week newsletter are my twice weekly Bold and Blunt podcasts. Right to your email box. Hey, it's a deal. You can't beat it. But if you don't want it delivered right to your email box, if you like to do that online search thing, then I suggest you go right to edify.app. That is the online platform for faith-based podcasts. You can get Bold and Blunt there. Or guess what? You can get Bold and Blunt wherever podcasts are offered. Yes, that's how popular Bold and Blunt is. Some analysts, CFR.org, writes about the Belt and Road Initiative, see the project as a disturbing expansion of Chinese power, and the United States has struggled to offer a competing vision. Well, it shouldn't be some analysts. It should be all analysts see the Belt and Road Initiative as disturbing, as a disturbing expansion of Chinese power. Because look, when China expands, freedom recedes. Individual liberty, in particular, stands in peril. The more China grows, the more China's influence grows, the more any communist influence grows around the globe. But China is the one that has promised to take its One Belt, One Road initiative into high gear and spread it far and wide around the world, crippling America's influence on the world stage. This is coming on strong. China's Belt and Road Initiative, sometimes referred to as the New Silk Road, is one of the most ambitious infrastructure, and that's infrastructure in air quotes, projects ever conceived. Yes, indeed it is. And guess what? It's not very good for America when another country like China dominates, right? When China is allowed to spread its tentacles into other countries, that means America has a harder time spreading its vision of democracy, its message and narrative of liberties around the world. Because China's not going to sit back and help these other nations, help these other struggling nations, and provide economic incentives to these nations to build up their own governments and infrastructure, right? Without pushing back on any other outside influences coming in, namely influences that carry a message of liberty and freedom and justice for all. As a condition of taking China's money, China's One Belt, One Road money, these nations, no doubt, have to promise to stop doing business with America, or at least put America business aside in favor of China business, China economies, the Chinese model. And we all know what the Chinese model is, right? It's no rights for none of its citizens. Where's America's Constitution going to stand when we in America are actively helping China along the road of its One Belt, One Road initiative? And that's exactly what this administration is doing. America, you would think, would be the wall to China spreading its communist influences. But under this administration, and really under the previous Barack Obama administration, America has been the force that has opened the doors, eased the path, greased the wheels for China to go forward and spread its ugly communist vision. Trump stood strong. Trump called out. The Trump administration called out the One Belt, One Road initiative as a danger to freedom, not just in America, but around the world. Barack Obama, too, called Joe Biden White House. Not so much. They're more the type to jump in bed with China than actually turn away or perish the thought, fight China, oppose China. So here we are in America, struggling not just with our own inflation, our own economy, our own cultural Marxism that is taking over our public school systems and places of higher learning. But here we are in America too, allowing just that type of ideology to spread, take root, and grow around the world. I don't know the fate of America, but I do know that historically speaking, republics don't last forever. And we are actually at that point in time where previous republics have never before gone. We've been alive and dominating so long on the world stage. It's impossible to imagine an America second class citizenry, third class, third world even. It's impossible to imagine an America that does not dominate. But guess what? There was a Rome that once upon a time thought similarly. There was a British Navy that mocked a fledgling uprising called patriotic colonial America. The thing about mighty powers is the higher they grow, the more powerful and mighty they become, the harder it is for those mighty powers to see when a fall is afoot, when they're about to crumble. The harder it is for those mighty powers to stomach the idea that, hey, may not be mighty for much longer. And this is where America is standing. If I had a fire alarm in my hand right now to ring, I would ring it. Because China's Belt and Road Initiative is moving forward at high speed, and America is busy crying that store shelves and prices may prevent their normal holiday shopping. There's the difference. There's a very big difference. And the bigger difference, though, is called JB, Joe Biden, in the White House. The big enabler for China to grow. My guest today, his name is Mike Hewitt. He is retired Rear Admiral of the Navy, and he is not just an expert on China and foreign affairs, but he's expert at putting into layman's terms so everybody can understand, even me. Everybody can understand the foreign policy repercussions of this administration, particularly when it comes to China's Belt and Road Initiative. Mike, I want to thank you so much for being back on Bold and Blunt. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Cheryl. Always glad to be on your show.
So I wanted to do this special episode on the Belt and Road Initiative, or One Belt, One Road Initiative, and you are the perfect expert for it. Just start by sort of putting a layman's definition of what this is.
Sure, and I think it probably would be very appropriate to also reference the meetings by President Biden and Xi
Yes.
that occurred, and we can talk about that. And one of the reasons I wanted to bring up that topic and the significance of it is it was actually 1 decade ago in October in Indonesia where the Chinese announced the unveiling of the Belt and Road Initiative.
That is.
So there's a lot of significance into the timing of this, as they always like to see.
So do you think that's purposeful then, the meeting?
I don't think it's purposeful simply from a Belt and Road Initiative perspective, but I think it's very purposeful in the ways that the Chinese think about history, as was referenced by President Xi today, and in some ways announcing the progress they've made since October of 2013 in Indonesia when they unveiled the Belt and Road Initiative. But essentially, it is a geopolitical outreach to 4 continents, looking at commerce, energy resources, mineral deposits, trade zones, centers for science and technology, intermodal commerce. It is a multi-trillion-dollar program by which the Chinese plan to build, in many respects, the follow-on to the Silk Road of centuries ago in exporting commerce, goods and services from China, and at the same time underpinning their geopolitical aspirations throughout most of the world.
So its supporters just paint it as a simple infrastructure project that China is just trying to help other nations with less financial stability develop their own infrastructure. And you say?
That's exactly the veneer by which they want it to be seen as. And if you follow the Chinese and how aggressively they've moved this Belt and Road Initiative in 2018, so in 2013 it was announced, in 2018 it was written into the Constitution of China with a conclusion date of 2049. And the question is, what does that conclusion date look like? And in many respects, it is tied to what they call unrestricted warfare doctrine, which was published back in 1999. It's very important to understand how the Chinese see and have obliterated the lines between commerce, economic development, intermodal commerce, and the military aspirations of China that's embedded in unrestricted warfare, where they have announced that they will win the next war without ever firing a shot. So the Belt and Road Initiative is really the advanced ground game, so to speak, of the Chinese Communist Party through predatory mercantilism, debt loan, and other commerce that will allow them to actually win that war without ever firing a shot.
And the sneaky evil genius of this plan is that so many other nations have signed on to it because they like the idea of getting loans from China, say, to help bolster their own country's flailing economies.
Well, precisely. And if you think about the strategic value of the Belt and Road Initiative, it's really hard to argue against supporting the build-out of future intermodal commerce,
right,
supporting nations' ability to grow, particularly in the emerging market. If you look at the scale of the Belt and Road Initiative, it's trillions of dollars. It touches half the world's population and in some ways can affect 25% of global GDP. It's the kind of thing that you would want the United States to be doing, but in fact the Chinese have displaced us in becoming the trusted nation for commerce and development, even though these nations know clearly what they're signing up for when they set these kinds of agreements with China.
And I want to get back to America's role in this too, but I want to ask you quickly. So this is all being done in Chinese currency as well, right? So it's another way of ingratiating China's influence around the world.
Well, it really is. And of course, they're being very subtle about it, but ultimately it will allow the push of the Chinese currency and displace the U.S. currency as the standard. And a lot of it is what we call predatory mercantilism. You've seen great examples in Sri Lanka, Kenya, and other places by which the Chinese come in and they broker these great deals with these countries loan them the money, agree to build out the infrastructure, and then, of course, the countries inevitably fail and the debt falls through and the Chinese renegotiate, except now they own that piece of property. And that's exactly what they're doing. And if you think about their strategy of owning rare earth minerals and natural resources, it is part and parcel of the Belt and Road Initiative to take over the key competencies and the key industries of the emerging market nations.
And so here comes the feckless Joe Biden administration basically bolstering China's ability with this initiative by claiming for all the world to hear that America is going to go zero emissions and go green energy and so forth and use only electric cars, which only gives China the upper hand in terms of natural resources, right?
I think that's exactly it. And unfortunately, our climate change-led agenda, which really has informed our foreign policy, and you would want it to be the other way around, has given China the opening both to flood the market with renewable energy resources to drive down the price, all the while building out their nuclear power industry, their fossil fuel industry. The Chinese built more coal-fired plants last year than ever before. They are excited to watch the United States continue to use decarbonization and climate change as a lever of foreign policy because we've seen it absolutely doesn't work. And much of the energy poverty crisis that we're facing today in Europe, in America, and really throughout the world is tied to the decarbonization strategies of renewable energy and driving out fossil fuels as the only reliable source of energy for these countries. So the Chinese are absolutely applauding America's focus on climate change, all the while they and Russia continue to focus on being the countries that will provide that reliable energy when the renewable energy strategy fails.
So Democrats have been pro-China for some time now, it seems. So they're sort of a lost cause in this question. But Republicans, with increasing alarm, have seemed to sort of put China interests above that of America's. And I'm curious, was it China's successes with this One Belt, One Road initiative that came first that drove Republicans to jump camp into onto China's side? Or was it that Republicans, selfish Republicans, went to China's side seemingly over America's first, and that emboldened China to advance its One Belt, One Road policy? It's sort of a which came first, chicken or the eggs approach.
I think it's both. I mean, I think that we have overbet on globalization going all the way back really to Nixon and have always wanted to see China as a reliable nation within the world order. And we have continued to believe that the more entangled we get with them economically, the more democratic they will become. And in fact, what the Chinese have done is graciously took up the mantle of being the global exporter of goods and services, diminishing America's ability to do it, and then really pushing their agenda forward, which is, I believe, that the days of democracies as defined by Western principles and Western civilization are over, and that the future of democracy will really be led by the authoritarian governments of Russia and China. And we were more or less the useful idiots that allowed this to occur. And you're watching China very aggressively now through their joint statements with Russia that came out of the Beijing Olympics and really their forcefulness with the Belt and Road Initiative and another initiative they call Made in China 2025, where they intend to really own all of the advanced industries that they have seen coming forward. So not only will they own the advanced technologies, we will be dependent upon them for those same advanced technologies. So I think it's been hoping that China would come along and become part of Western civilization. They've absolutely never intended to do that. And they now really own the high ground when it comes to economic dominance. And by the way, their military is now being built up to be an equivalent military to the United States.
Why is it so hard for the leadership in America to call out certain countries as opposite to America's interest, to call them out even as evil in terms of what their party leadership puts forth in their own countries, and to refuse to deal with them. Has America just grown so in love with making money and cheap goods that we're willing to do business with evil entities?
I think to some degree that is true. I also think that our leadership has lost the art of statecraft. And frankly, we don't understand, and we don't pay attention. I say this all the time. The Chinese write their doctrine, they publish their doctrine, and then they execute it. We just don't pay attention to what they're saying or doing. And we have fallen in love with this idea of globalization. We obviously have a lot of companies that are dependent upon Chinese procurement of goods and services. We've become incredibly entangled with them economically and dependent upon many of the resources that they now own, particularly the ones tied to climate change, by the way. And so we just don't understand what they are doing as a rising power. And we also don't understand that they see us as a declining power. And until we understand that, we won't understand things such as today's meeting in Indonesia and how she perceives that meeting versus how Biden perceives it.
It's funny you say that they write their policy, they execute their policy, and America just fails to read the policy or believe it. That's exactly what the World Economic Forum did with its Great Reset. They wrote it, and they're busily executing it. But let's talk quickly about Biden with Xi in Indonesia. What do you see there as alarming?
Well, I think unfortunately, President Biden has this habit of boxing in world leaders. He did it with Putin with respect to Ukraine, where he, on one hand, talked about regime change, and then on the other hand, talked about Armageddon, and in some ways kind of boxes Putin into the decisions he has to make. Biden has done something similar with Taiwan, where he really kind of erased what we used to call strategic ambiguity and talked very forcefully about putting troops on the ground in Taiwan. And then, of course, it appeared to be completely uncoordinated with the visit by the speaker when Nancy Pelosi went over a few months ago.
That's right.
And what comes out of today's meeting, what I read out of today's meeting is that our policy hasn't changed, but what you've seen China do is become very aggressive with respect to Taiwan and get away with it. And I think, unfortunately, what she has been doing really for the last 15 years is measuring the merit of the United States and watching us in Iraq,
yes,
Afghanistan, and now Ukraine. And unfortunately, he now has the military capability, if he decides to take Taiwan. And I haven't seen anything out of the Biden administration that would countermand that.
Yeah, China's playing chess and Joe Biden's playing chutes and ladders at best. It is a little bit ridiculous and alarming to watch. But I want to finish up on this because I'm getting the idea that you're seeing, when you look at the bare facts of what China's doing versus what this feckless administration is doing, that there's little hope for America to resume dominance on the world stage. What needs to be done in order to reel back China's influence and America assume the leadership role that we need to be?
Well, I think it would start by demonstrating again to our allies that we're a reliable partner. And I'm not talking about allies that we think of, such as NATO allies. I'm talking about allies such as Saudi Arabia, which we really have not understood the strategic importance of that relationship. We've boxed Putin in on Ukraine and have been feckless with our response there, and really have diminished our military capacity supporting the Ukrainians. The Chinese have demonstrated a lot of hard power in the last 5 to 10 years, and we aren't responding to that. We aren't demonstrating a deterrent force, and in many ways, if the United States is to return itself to being the reliable partner, not only in Western civilization but throughout the world, is we have to start supporting these countries and stop being so politically minded. What Xi and Putin are telling the world is that look at the politics of America. Look at the politics of the UK. You can't trust these countries anymore. They change their mind They don't have any strategy. They have no statecraft. And we, as the rising powers, will provide you what you need economically, militarily, and we will not meddle in the internal politics of your country. Unfortunately, we aren't doing anything to change that attitude by our allies. And in some ways, we have demonstrated to many of our allies we aren't that trusted partner that you look for in the 21st century.
So last question, just to pursue that point a little bit more. Could Joe Biden damage America so much in the last couple years he still has as president that the next president of the United States would not be able to undo the damage? In other words, will we get to a point of no return where America will never be able to assume the role of global leader because of Joe Biden's policies?
I think there's a potential that we can find ourselves so diminished by our focus on climate change and our ignoring the rise of Russia and China and what's happening that we may not be able to claw it back. If we could do anything right now, I would love to see us arm Taiwan to the teeth, discuss deterrence with our allies, and make sure China understands that we will not accept their aggressive military posture with Taiwan. And there is a lot of concern right now that the mark on the wall is 2024, and if China is going to move and really make it irreversible, it's going to be in the next 2 years. And unfortunately, I think a lot of that has to do with the policies we've seen, not just from the Biden administration, but from the Obama administration as well.
I agree with you, Mike. You're the expert, but I agree with you, and I think a lot of Americans feel that instinctively right now. But you know what? Few people actually come out and say the truth of what you just pointed out. So I really appreciate you speaking on Bold and Blunt about this. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Well, it's not exactly the cheeriest of news to think about, especially since that red wave never occurred in the midterm elections, and now we have to suffer the arrogance of Democrats pretending as if they have standing now to go forward just these types of pro-China policies that they've been pushing for a long time. So what do you think? You think America stands a chance? I don't know. I don't know myself. I put this in the domain of God must save America, because it's getting very quickly to the point where without God, America is doomed. I want to thank you for listening. I want to remind you that if you like Bold and Blunt, you can get Bold and Blunt at edify.app. You can also get Bold and Blunt at washingtontimes.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Tune in next time. I appreciate your support very, very much. And I want to remind you, no matter what happens, no matter what these coming days and weeks and months bring in terms of political turmoil and cultural degradation, remember, stay blunt, stay bold.